MECFS alert at the origins of the Tahoe outbreak that launched America's recognition of its MECFS pandemic. Here we are at Truckee High School, where teachers using a certain room, which later was proved to be vastly infected with mold, all one after another became sick. Eric, you can give us a little more of the background on that.
Yeah, I was a student at Truckee High School years ago, and I became aware of my reactivity to that room, and pretty much everybody in the school knew that it was a place to be avoided, but most people managed to survive their exposure until the China flu came along in 1985, which hit a whole bunch of teachers in this particular lounge right up at the front of the school. As described on page 28 of Osler's Web by Erik Johnson. This incident scared Dr. Cheney and Dr. Peterson into thinking they were seeing an epidemic, something more than just the random isolated cases of illness that were wandering into their office. They called the CDC to come out and investigate, but nothing was ever found in this room, mostly because at this time the toxic mold Stachybotrys was not yet in the medical literature, and there was no understanding that toxic mold could even be a factor.
Well, the dirty trick about mold and toxic mold, but yards away with the wallboard, mold loves cellulose, which is inside wallboard, or it can be anywhere in the HVAC system, and we hardly have a building without an HVAC system.
Yeah, and Stachybotrys in particular is a large and heavy wet spore, so most of the exposure comes from the toxin-laden submicron fragments.
Right.
Yeah, the one teacher sensed how bad it was in the room, decided to take evasive action, hopped in his camper and graded his paper, and he alone of this group of 10 teachers managed to avoid the chronic illness.
Let's move a little further along the Tahoe North Shore towards the east and look at some other aspects of this breakout. This is MECFS alert making a historic spot across behind me, memorializes the Donner family whose ill fate is so well known. Right before the outbreak we've been talking about, it was an unusually damp winter, wasn't it? We had a lot of snow.
Very heavy winter, yes.
Around here. And then you had a lot of disturbances in the wildlife, the flora and fauna, right? So you had some kind of algae bloom.
Yeah, we were having a really bad algae bloom, something we'd never seen before. And one of the things that convinced me that there was an effect from the algae bloom was that one morning I came down to the beach and it was completely covered with dead crawdads.
Oh God.
Millions of them. So many had crawled out of the water that you literally could not walk on the beach without stepping on crawdads. Never seen anything like it before, never seen anything like it since. And as they exited the lake, you could see the trails where all of them were trying to get away from the water, none going toward the water.
What size are the crayfish around here? About 3-4 inches?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I had read about that the bloom could in fact be that poisonous. And this sounds like an extraordinary poison. Did anyone go out and collect any algae and analyze it?
No, in fact, I talked to people and I said, we should look into the algae bloom because it could have been dangerous.
Well, it was dangerous to the crawfish, obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And they said, well, if it were dangerous, somebody would warn us. Some authorities would warn us. And I go, who? They don't even know it's here.
Right. What about the frogs? You told me a lot of frogs died?
Yeah, at the same time, the meadows up in the trees where we had vast numbers of frogs, the frogs simply disappeared. Their population crashed.
So we have this very wet climate for a while. We have the crawdaddies or the crayfish dying. We have the frogs dying. What comes next?
A mystery illness that affected hundreds, if not thousands of people at North Lake Tahoe.
And we know that the children who were playing on this beach came down sick.
Yeah, we had an entire cluster of sick people directly behind this beach.
And yet we're in such a beautiful space. How could anyone get sick here?
Well, I think we had some special atmospheric conditions that existed at this time. For that was when the pollution from the San Joaquin Valley first started to crest this and fill up the Tahoe Basin.
So that you would be seeing brown brown haze over there from the San Joaquin?
Absolutely. We saw it crest the mountains, fill up the basin with this horrible haze, and we were terribly worried about what effect this would have on the trees, on the tourism.
And did it hit the trees? Can you see spots on the trees?
Yes, the trees all got sick at the same time.
How many did you lose proportionately?
Trees, we had stands of trees that all suddenly died off at one time with no reasonable explanation for it. We looked at automobile exhaust, we looked at bark beetles. Many theories were ventured for why the trees were getting sick, and some people did blame the pollution, but no extensive investigation was ever done to try to find out if this were the case.
Do we know what was in the pollution, what the chemicals were? Were they special? Was it just more automobile?
Well, this is conjecture, but we can only assume that whatever pesticides, particulates, acid rain that would normally exist in the top of the pollution plume in the San Joaquin Valley flowed into the lake and affected the soil flora, the microbiome, and unleashed an algal bloom such as we've never seen before and never had since.
Of course, San Joaquin is a great agricultural province, and you would have pesticides and herbicides and so on coming over.
Well, this is the very beach where Chris Guthrie brought her son, where they filmed the...
Tim Johnson 2020.
So, yeah.
1986.
The 1986 ABC News segment was filmed on this very beach.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful even now in October.
Yeah. The same time of year as when the CDC investigation took place.
That's right. October 25th they arrived, didn't they?
Yes.
Around then, or they were here then. And did they sample? Did the CDC sample any of the algae or
no,
any of the water?
The CDC was only interested in finding out if this was an outbreak of the chronic mononucleosis syndrome. They weren't here. It was no part of their mission to try to find out anything else that was going on. So they came and they collected viral testing for the EBV, and then they were out of here. That was it. But during their stay, CDC epidemiologists John Kaplan and Gary Holmes climbed Mount Tahoe down at the South Shore.
It must have taken them quite a while.
Took them all day.
Kind of wore them out for doing the old epidemiology, I'll bet.
So, contrary to popular belief, the CDC epidemiologists were not out here skiing. It's a little bit warm for that. No, they were climbing mountains.
There's one thing we haven't talked about yet in the matter of environment and microbiomes and so forth. That winter, 84, 85, they were having trouble getting enough snow. And they were seeding the clouds with nanoparticles.
Yeah, our first theory for the alteration in the algal bloom, in the possibility of the trees getting sick, and in the mystery illness itself was the intense cloud seeding that was taking place at this time.
Did that go on into 85, 86, or was that a better year for snow?
They started installing snowmaking equipment immediately after the outbreak, and I've always suspected that the discontinuation of the cloud seeding was due to their own fear that possibly this might have resulted in these environmental alterations. The Desert Research Institute had an official cloud seeding program.
Yeah.
They had mountaintop cloud seeding devices all scattered upwind of the ski areas, but the ski industry had hired private aircraft to, in a completely unregulated fashion, douse every cloud that was headed our direction.
So we have at least 5 different chemical, environmental factors coming over the mountains, from the clouds, from the natural snow. Everything was changing at Tahoe in a very short space of time.
Yeah, and the common denominator, the outcome of all this, seemed to be a eutrophication event, where the fungus, the algae, just acted in ways that we'd never seen before. Eutrophication is enhancement of the microbial growth by nitrogen and runoff from agricultural sources.
So we have agricultural sources running in here.
No, there's no agriculture up here at all.
No. So it's only what's coming over the mountain.
So if we had a eutrophication event, it had to arise from something other than the customary sources. algal blooms that normally exist in all the other places. This is the most beautiful place you can imagine. So what could have possibly happened here? And my suspicion is that it was pollution from the San Joaquin coming over the mountains at this time.
And long ago, this had all been perfectly pristine.
Oh yeah, you could look across the lake and see the color of the green trees and the granite rocks.
Yeah, and it is a little foggy even now.
This is about as good as it gets now.
The view, that is foggy. Thank you. Here we are in Incline Village, Nevada, and we're just in front of the famous, sometimes notorious office of Doctors Cheney and Peterson, who were the people who recognized that they were looking at some kind of outburst, endemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it. The CDC never agreed with it being an outburst. Tell us a little bit about how the office interacted with the town.
The townspeople were so worried about the outbreak of hysteria created by these two quack doctors, Cheney and Peterson, that they tried to drive them out of town, have their licenses revoked, and we were banned from the hospital here.
This is a town and a region that lives and dies on tourism and real estate. That's all there is anymore. The timbering is gone and the mining is farther east.
Yeah, the CDC actually chose the bad name chronic fatigue syndrome to disguise the scary nature of the outbreak and spare the Tahoe economy.
It worked. Of course, we do want to stress that Tahoe is back to normal. The algae blooms are gone, and it's looking pretty good. We're at the Incline Overlook now, and with this incredibly beautiful scene in our background, we want to stress that the numbers of factors, which may include as many as 5 biological factors, that conspired to create this outbreak have passed on. At least the combination of factors and viruses and other inputs have passed on. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. By October of 1985, the algal bloom and the virus and everything that had come together to create this phenomenon had disappeared. And when the CDC arrived, Dr. Cheney was reporting that there were no new cases.
And now Dr. Peterson, who I saw here for MECFS Alert a few years ago, also told me that he's treating cases from all over the country, but none of them are new Tahoe cases. No more to be found. Aren't we lucky we can come here for vacation?
Absolutely, it's perfectly safe.